Hey everybody, I'm Chef Tom with allthingsbbq.com, and this is Kansas City brisket burn-ins. Today we're going to be smoking up one of the most iconic foods from Kansas City. It's brisket burn-ins, and this might just be my favorite barbecue food. Now, we're going to keep it pretty classic. We're going to use some Kansas City flavors. We're going to take some liberties, of course, but more importantly, we're going to walk you through the entire process, teach you exactly what it takes to come out with those juicy, succulent burn-ins every single time. All right, so what we're starting with today is a 15.5-pound USDA Choice Master Chef brisket, a whole packer brisket from Creekstone Farms, and this stuff is about as good as it gets. Their choice level meat is on a prime level for pretty much everyone else. So unless you've got an incredibly cool hookup, chances are you're gonna need to start with a whole packer brisket in order to make burn-ins. And the reason for that is because there are two muscles in the brisket. There's the point that sits on top. You can actually see that meat right here, kind of comes around about here, sits on the top, while the flat sits underneath. And the flat is where we get our slices from. The point is where we get our burnt ends, and it's kind of difficult to find this on its own, so we're gonna separate it out from the whole brisket. So first thing I'm gonna do is just cut off the side here so that we can get a look at where our fat and our meat are. Got a lot of fat right on top of this, and that's all right. Actually, this is gonna show us exactly where that line is. So this is the flat here, it kind of tapers off. This is the point up here. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna start at the top end of the point. We're gonna work our way down, trim off the fat from the top of the point. And as we work our way down, we'll find where those two muscles meet and peel them apart. Now most of this fat, I'm gonna save this to make sausage with later. This goes great in your grind. There's no meat in the middle of that. It's just good fat, great for sausage making. Not so great for trying to eat off the top of your burnt ends. Now, why would we be taking all the fat off of the top of our point meat? Well, that's because all of the fat that matters is the intramuscular fat that runs through the center of the meat strands, and that's these strands right here. That intramuscular fat, that's the fat that melts down to give you nice, juicy burn ends. A lot of this surface fat, the soft stuff at least, would melt down as well, but it doesn't really add anything to the burn ends themselves. It just kind of drips off, creating smoke, which is fine, but one thing that you have when you have fat on the surface is a barrier in between the smoke and the meat. So if we can expose this meat, then we can get all of our seasoning on here and all the smoke we want onto our burn ends. All right, so we've cleaned up the top there, and where this muscle ends is pretty apparent right here on top of the flat meat. So what we're gonna do now is just make a tiny little incision here. And if I look right through there, you can see a different meat underneath. That's the flat. That's how thin this end of the point muscle is. But that's right where we're gonna start to peel things back. So we're just gonna follow this line. There's a vein of fat in between the two muscles. But what you're gonna see as we start separating this is there's these little strands, these little white strands that are gonna go vertical. That's just all that's holding it together here. So we're gonna make nice, gentle cuts. I'll take my glove off here to get a better grip, but what we're looking at is those nice little strands. We want those to come apart. So we get the knife right under the edge there. And then what I like to do is just let all of the weight do the work. So I'll pick this guy up, short little cuts, cutting through those strands, separating the two muscles. Now this stuff here at the end is gonna be so thin, don't even worry about if you lose it. You could go right through it and trim it off later because it's literally just a tiny thin strap or a little bit of meat there. So now here's a nice little mistake I made that'll help you guys. Anytime we're teaching a class on this and we're showing people how to do this, I always tell them, just stay in the white. If you get too far south, you're gonna run into some red, right? That's a little bit of meat. So make an adjustment and go back north. Same thing, if you get into the point meat, just make an adjustment. Just know that if you're staying in the white, you're in the right spot to be. So I'm really just rolling this muscle back now as we continue to make those small cuts to separate the two muscles. And it's probably 20 degrees outside, so my hand is completely numb at this point. Not my prettiest work, but we're gonna get the job done. Now there's a little bit of a tricky part here at the end because this muscle, while it sits on top, it also wraps around the end. So you don't wanna just go straight off the end or you're gonna cut off part of the point muscle. So you've gotta just continue to follow that fat line as it turns down. And if we flip this over, you can see where that fat line is going to run. So we'll just follow that. Boom, one last big scary cut, and it's done. All right, so here we have the point muscle isolated from the whole Packer brisket and the flat. We just need to do a little bit more trimming on this. Like I said, super thin down here. We can go ahead and just kind of trim the end of that off, and that can go into our scrap pile for grind. And then we've got some big chunks of fat that we need to take care of. So here's one right here. This was kind of the wedge sitting in between the flat and the point. As you can see, no meat on the inside of that. So again, we're just taking all the hard fat off the surface so that we can expose the meat to the seasoning and the smoke while we rely on the intramuscular fat to keep our burn-ins nice and juicy. All right, so this is what it looks like all cleaned up. You kind of got this thinner skirt out here, and there's usually sort of a mound of meat on the back. This one's a little bit thinner than a lot, but in order to really make this cook evenly, usually what I like to do is go ahead and butterfly that mound out so that this will cook in the same amount of time as the other end. So in order to do that, just take our knife, we come in there on the horizontal. We're not gonna cut all the way through to the end. Just far enough to press that out so it's kind of all on the same level. And the great thing here is when you go to slice into your cubes, you've just got one level of cubes to worry about with bark on all sides. So now that we got the point trimmed out, we're gonna get into seasoning. Now for seasoning, I like to do some special stuff for burn-ins. It's not necessarily the same way I'd treat it as the flat, and you kind of have that luxury when you separate the two. Over the years, burn-ins have become such a phenomenon that people are really thinking about, now how do I want my burn-ins to turn out? Not just what are we gonna do with these scraps, these burnt edges of the brisket that they used to put up on the counter when they were trimming out the sandwiches, but how can I really make this as good as possible? So when we're thinking about flavor on our burn-ins, what I really like to think about is first salt, of course. You gotta have salt on a big piece of beef. A little bit of sweetness, and sweetness really helps the caramelization on the outside and gives you that nice bark. And then I like to get a little bit creative. Today we're gonna add some coffee. I really like to do something with a little bit of spice as well on our burnt ends. So we'll probably be adding a little bit of hot sauce later on during the cook, but for now we're gonna focus on just the dry rubs. We've got Plowboy's Bovine Bold, classic Kansas City. Plowboy's has made a name for themselves in Kansas City because their barbecue is fantastic. And this Bovine Bold is exactly what you wanna put on your burnt ends. On top of that, we're going with the Cattleman's Grill Smoky Chipotle. It adds coffee and it adds big chunks of that sugar, which are gonna create great bark and great color on the outside. But before we get to the dry rubs, we need a little bit of binder. So we're gonna use some Big Rick's jalapeno honey mustard. Again, just putting a little bit of sugar on the surface, helps with some caramelization. But more than anything, this is just to get the rub to stick to the meat. So we're starting off with that Bovine Bold. This is a finer seasoning, so it's gonna go down first with the coarser seasoning on top. Just kind of press that into the binder, into the meat, until it starts to really look like it's attached. You see some wet spots on the surface, and then you can go right in there with the smoky chipotle. So you see that coffee in there, you see those big chunks of sugar, and then we get just a little bit of heat out of that chipotle chili. This is where we can be a little bit creative. There's all kinds of great rubs out there, and these small batch rubs are so fantastic because they're made just a little bit at a time to keep the ingredients as fresh as possible. So once again, just down with the finer seasoning first. Love that bovine, that little bit of celery in there, a little bit of sweet, a little bit of salt. Awakens the umami. And then that earthy coffee crust on top of that. Beautiful. Now today we're going to be smoking on the Yoder Smokers YS640S pellet grill. We're running cherry and pecan pellets at 250 degrees. As you can see, we've already got one on here. It's been on for about half an hour already. Already starting to see those moisture pockets form, which is fantastic. I'm going to throw this second guy right next to him here. Now, one more thing we're going to do before we walk away is I'm going to light up an amazing smoke tube filled with the same pellets that we're smoking with, just to really pump that smoke flavor into the meat today. We're going to try to get these done in about 8 hours or less. And when you're trying to cook quicker than a normal pace, say you could do this at 225, 200, let it go all day long. But when you're trying to go faster, this is going to help you set the bark in record time. So we're gonna slide this just here on the left-hand side and light it up with the torch. So we'll just let that burn out on its own. It only takes about 30 seconds, maybe a minute, until it burns out, starts producing that really nice smoke. Well guys, it's been about 3 hours that our burn-ins have been smoking away on the cooker. I wanna give you a peek and see what they look like. We're not really ready to do anything with them yet, but they just look so great right now. I want you to take a look. Look at that. Moisture pockets all over the place. Darkening up, we're getting some really great brown. Oh man, the bark right there. These things are looking good, but we're just gonna let them ride. Continue to darken up that bark before we wrap these up to finish them up in foil. Well, we're about 4.5 hours into the cook now. We're gonna take a peek one more time, and this time we're gonna pull these off and wrap them up. Look at that. That is just beautiful. Great color on the outside of those. Man, these are getting flexible. Certainly not done, but that's what we're gonna do here in the wraps. We're gonna wrap these up and braise them off for a bit to finish them. All right, so we're gonna go down on the foil here. We're gonna add just a little bit extra liquid to make sure that everything stays nice and juicy. I'm gonna go with just a splash of beef stock here. And then a little bit of added flavor and a little added heat with some Flay Volcano. This is a smoky red chili hot sauce. But you could add just about anything you like here. If you like beer in there, add some beer. If you wanna add a juice or something, you have that option as well. You also have the option to not wrap these at all. It'll definitely change the texture. You'll have a much crustier outside. When I'm cooking these separated from the flat, I really like to go ahead and wrap them because it ensures that they're still gonna be juicy. They're not gonna be totally dried out by the time they're tender. So we'll do this one more time here. A little bit of beef stock, a little bit of hot sauce. And that stuff's gonna work its way around the point muscle as it braises inside this foil. So back on the grill now, I'm gonna kick this grill up to 300 degrees just to expedite this process. Well, the thickest part of the point is now temping at about 205, so we're gonna check on a tenderness. Essentially what we're looking for here is for there to be very little resistance when we probe the point. I mean, it should feel like going into butter, and we are there. Like, that is just completely butter. Perfect. Oh man, that is a thing of beauty. So this is where your brisket point becomes burnt ends. From here, we're gonna cube up the point meat, toss it in a little bit of sauce, and put it back on the grill for that sauce to tack up and for the outside to get just the right texture. So this should be a pretty easy process here, but you're gonna want a nice sharp knife because this is gonna be so tender at this point that you don't wanna have to try and tear this thing apart. And just look at the layers of fat that have begun to melt in there, giving it that really springy texture. All right, so good big bite-sized chunks, maybe 2 bite-sized chunks. I can't resist, go ahead and try a little bit now. Oh man. It just melts in your mouth. And it's amazing, the seasonings on that. I don't taste any single one of them. It's become a really great blend. This doesn't taste like coffee on brisket. It tastes earthy, but it's got a slight sweetness to it, just the right amount of salt. So our burnt ends going back to the pan where they'll be finished. So now that we've got those cubed, before they go back onto the pit, we're gonna hit them with a little bit of barbecue sauce. We've got the Smoke on Wheels Kansas City bootleg. So this is a great Kansas City barbecue sauce with a really unique twist. It's got some bourbon infused into it as well as some cola. But a red tomato-based sauce nonetheless. Not going super heavy on the sauce. We want to add just a little bit of sweetness to the outside. Just enough to coat our burnt ends. All right, we're almost there. In fact, we're really close. These just need to go back on the grill to kind of tack that sauce up. It's pretty hot, starting to tack up on its own, but we want a really great texture on the outside of our burnt ends. So back onto the grill at this point. Well, we did it, burnt ends in under 8 hours. It's been about 7 to 7.5 now. These guys have been on for about 20 minutes since we cubed them up, and they're ready to come off. How beautiful is that? Well, let's give them a try. All right, let's check this out. I mean, that is just ideal. See how it's just barely holding together? All of that fat and connective tissue is broken down, lent its juices into the burnt end, but man, what a bark. That's about all you can ask for out of a burnt end. Just melts in your mouth. It's sweet, but not too sweet. Definitely getting some of that back end heat now. And really great crunch from the bark. I mean, I don't think that barbecue gets any better than this. And Kansas City certainly does it best. Thank you guys so much for watching. Be sure to check out allthingsbbq.com for all of the products featured in today's video. If you enjoyed the recipe, hit that subscribe button. And if you have any questions or comments or there's anything you'd like to see me cook, let me know in the comment section down below, and let's be good to one another. For more recipes, tips, and techniques, head over to allthingsbbq.com/thesauce. All Things Barbecue, where barbecue legends are made. Go Chiefs.